So welcome again, and thank you very much for taking the time to join the public launch of the Yemen Conflict Observatory. This is a joint initiative between the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, or ACLED, and the Yemen Data Project. And this is now a reality thanks to the very generous support from the Open Society Foundation and the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. My name is Clionadh. I'm the President and CEO of ACLED, and our 250 staff, as well as key partners, such as those like the Yemen Data Project, who are with us today, research, code, and analyze all reported events of political violence and demonstrations in 243 countries and territories worldwide. We have data on 1.7 million events, which are publicly available for download and use on our website. The Yemen Data Project is an independent data collection project which has been collecting and disseminating data on the conduct of the war in Yemen since 2015. And this increases, of course, the transparency and promotes accountability amongst those involved in this conflict. During this exclusive event today, our speakers will discuss the recent trends in violence across Yemen's quite complex conflict landscape, including, of course, the ongoing tensions in the Red Sea, before introducing you to the YCO, as I mentioned, the Yemen Conflict Observatory, and walking you through its tools and analysis, which have been developed to support the work of policymakers and practitioners and those who are interested, such as you on the call. I'd now love to give a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists. First, I would like to introduce Nawal Al-Maghafi, who is a broadcast journalist, documentary maker, and news presenter, and has been reporting for the BBC from around the world for over a decade, covering the human impact of conflict in some of the world's most hostile environments. I'm sure you will recognize her from several of the BBC's key programs, such as, of course, the World Service, BBC I, and their latest flagship program, Newsnight, where she is the lead international correspondent. Welcome, Nawal. I'm also joined by Iona Craig, an award-winning freelance journalist and representative of the Yemen Data Project since 2016. The Yemen Data Project collects and disseminates data on the conflict in Yemen to increase transparency, as we noted, and promote accountability from the actors involved in that conflict, and also provide an extremely useful resource, especially during some of the days where it was very unclear what was happening within Yemen. And last, and certainly not least, we have, of course, Dr. Luca Nevola, and he is ACLED's Middle East Regional Specialist, who coordinates and produces analysis for the Yemen Conflict Observatory. Luca serves as our point of contact for the partnerships and external engagement across the Middle East desks, and has over 15 years of experience in nonprofits, academia, and the private sector. He is also an absolutely wonderful analyst, and we are blessed to have him. So before we go on, I wish to just do some light housekeeping and logistics. For a translation to Arabic in a Yemeni dialect, this will be provided during the webinar. So if you would like to listen in Arabic, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screens now, and that should handle that real-time translation. Okay, so welcome again to those who have just joined us. We're going to set the scene a little bit about what is happening within Yemen more broadly and why we felt the need to have a conflict observatory. We have a number of others. They are mostly, in fact, all at this point located within African countries. And this is our first non-African observatory. And we are incredibly grateful to have been supported to set this up, and of course, for our partnership with the YDP. So Yemen remains one of the world's most complex and severe conflict environments, and especially that within the Middle East. So amid dynamic regional shifts, the conflict in Yemen has entered a new phase quite recently, marked by unprecedented challenges, with domestic tensions being increasingly influenced by regional and international factors. So to put it one way, Yemen has in many ways become a proxy war. Since the start of the conflict in 2014, ACLED estimates that over 112,000 people have died as a direct result of the violence, including over 12,600 civilians in targeted attacks. And those are just simply those who have died, let alone been exposed to the conflict since 2014. In fact, last year alone, we saw that the share of violent events that targeted civilians more than double, with the country ranking 9th on our conflict index. And this was primarily due to the lethality of the events and the danger it poses to civilians. And of course, Yemen features constantly on the most violent countries within our conflict watch lists and conflict index. So the current domestic situation in Yemen remains tense despite the recent announcement of the UN Roadmap to Peace through what was a Yemeni-owned political process that took several years. There are several factors which help inform the current context in which we felt that an observatory would do this conflict a little bit more justice to bring these factors to light. So there are several factors which I'd like to review now. There is an increased repression by the Houthi-led Sana'a-based government onto the remnants of the local opposition. There is increased mobility spurred by the truce, which has led to frequent landmine and explosive remnants of war incidents. And of course, as I mentioned, there was a 55% increase in the violence specifically against migrants attempting to cross the Yemeni-Saudi border. In 2014 thus far, alongside these domestic developments, of course, I'm sure many, if not everybody, is aware that the Houthis have increasingly shifted their strategic focus towards the Red Sea. And the Houthis' latest attack on shipping vessels in the Red Sea and the subsequent responses overshadowed the progress made in 2013 for peace in Yemen. And we see that there's several both political and military engagements involving the Houthis now that are in many ways a regression. A regional escalation in the Red Sea, which intrinsically has linked itself, of course, to the conflict in Gaza, could lead to a resurgence of the conflict that has recently been mediated through this peace process. Of course, my co-panelist from the BBC, Nawal, will dive deeper into this in a minute. So against the backdrop of this complex and dynamic conflict landscape, it is essential to provide accessible understanding of conflict patterns, drivers, and agents in Yemen, to inform the dialogue that is realistic and takes away and makes way for a conflict-sensitive and effective program design. And that is really the basis of the reason we created the YCO. And of course, ACLED and its longtime partner, the Yemen Data Project, had been talking about having a conflict observatory for many years. Just as a note, the observatories that we've previously had, and of course this one, is designed to provide policymakers, practitioners, journalists, and academics with an array of publicly accessible tools and products, data, analysis, etc. And it combines these data-driven analysis pieces with robust qualitative and contextual assessments of the political violence and the general disorder, in part to enable greater awareness of how the status quo is evolving. Of course, as previously mentioned, the Yemeni status quo is extremely volatile. As each phase of the conflicts impacts a different subset of groups, sectors, and industries in Yemen, the YCO is designed to have a systematic approach to data collection and analysis that considers the shifting trends in their chronological and situational contexts. And it is the first of its kind to do that, especially being public. The YCO also produces quite deep analytical pieces that are defined both by sector and theme that enables actors to be more adaptable to the shifting situation and needs in country. So we recognize not only is there a great number of groups within Yemen to keep track of and to understand their strategies and their logics, but also there's a great number of organizations, people, interests outside of Yemen, which require this information in a useful and practical way that is also unbiased. The YCO tools, of course, bring a more nuanced, accessible, and quite importantly, an actionable understanding of the wider conflict trends in Yemen, which we hope will, of course, underscore and help support various humanitarian and peace-building initiatives. As a repository of open source information on conflict, the YCO and its data are also freely available to all CSOs as a tool to support efforts towards transitional justice and further accountability in the country. And I would like to note, of course, is that our analysis and, of course, the expertise of Luca and others working on this is also available to those interested in further information on Yemen. But on that note, I would like to once again thank you all for joining us today and for, of course, supporting the work of ACLED and YDP. And I would like to give the floor to Nawal for her to take on the current trends of violence and the political developments in the Red Sea, which are a concern for everybody. I just returned from Munich, where it was a very hot topic, and I'm sure Nawal will do it great justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've been reporting on Yemen for over a decade now for the BBC, and in the last 9 years, the main focus has been reporting on the war between the Saudi and UAE-led coalition, whose aims and objectives were to reinstate the Yemeni government and haven't been successful in doing so, and the Houthis, who are backed by Iran. And throughout the work that I've done in the last 9 years on that, the work that you guys do has been invaluable. I've used the Yemen Data Project's resources time and time again to back up my reporting. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this event today. I feel like I'm giving back, and I just think the work that all of you do is incredibly important. So thank you for having me. But today I've been asked to talk about the latest events in Yemen. It's a really interesting time. The Houthis are now attacking one of the world's most important shipping routes. I think none of us expected this, for them to have this much power. So it's been an intriguing time and an interesting time to follow what's going on in Yemen. When I think back to my last decade of reporting on Yemen, the one thing I always think is that the Houthis have been continuously underestimated. One of the first trips I ever did as a reporter in Yemen was to a place called Sada, which is a stunning medieval city in the far north of Yemen, which is where the Houthis come from. And I always think back to that trip, and I think about how astonishing it is that this group of fighters that I met back then, I think back then people used to say that they were about 10,000 fighters. I'm sure there are a few more than that, were able to march to the capital city, take over state institutions in the capital Sana'a, with the support of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. They then killed their main partner, former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, and consolidated his fighters with their own, and have now become one of the main powers in northern Yemen. It's quite extraordinary. Not only that, but since November, they've attacked ships with drones and missiles from positions in Yemen, which has resulted in hundreds of ships avoiding the Suez Canal and sailing an extra 4,000 miles around Africa, burning more fuel, inflating costs, and adding 10 days of travel or more in each direction. Now, the Houthis say that they're seeking to disrupt shipping links with Israel, and that they want to force Israel to end its military campaign in Gaza. And initially, they were only targeting ships with links to Israel. Now, one could say that, possibly that is the reason why they're doing this. Now, I don't believe that that was their main motivation. But I do believe that if the war on Gaza were to stop, it would force the Houthis to stop attacking ships. Because the Houthi leaders and their supporters have presented these attacks as evidence that they're the only force in the region that's willing to take action to help Palestinians, as we've watched the war on Gaza escalate in the last couple of months. But ever since the UK and the US responded with strikes into Houthi positions in Yemen, ships connected to more than a dozen countries have now been targeted. The Houthis have now said that all ships that have any links to America and to the UK are targets too. And they continuously say that the only way they will stop is if there is a ceasefire and humanitarian aid is allowed into Gaza. Now, the turmoil that these attacks have created has been extraordinary. To give you an idea, in the first 2 weeks of this year, only around 150 ships passed through the Suez Canal. That was down from over 400 ships at the same time last year. Shipping companies have tripled the prices they charge to take a container from Asia to Europe, partly to cover the extra cost of sailing around Africa. Ship owners that still use the Red Sea, mainly tanker owners, are facing rising insurance premiums. And I was reading yesterday that this could worsen inflation costs. It's been estimated that worldwide consumer prices for goods could go up 0.7% in the first half of this year if shipping disruptions continue. So far, no deaths or injuries have been confirmed from these attacks, the attacks launched by the Houthis. Some vessels have been damaged. A car carrier, the Galaxy Leader, was hijacked in November and taken into Yemen. And since then, I have watched multiple videos online of the Houthis holding weddings now on this ship as a show of power and of success. And despite these continuous airstrikes by the US and its allies against the Houthis have persisted with their attacks. And so the question is, for me, I think the main question, as someone who has followed the conflict in Yemen for the last 9 years and seen the incredible or continuous bombardment of Houthi areas in Yemen by the Saudi UAE-led coalition, is how are the areas that are being targeted by the US and the UK right now in the last few weeks any different to the locations that the US and UK supported the Saudi-led coalition in hitting in the last 9 years? It seems to me that the attacks on these military sites is more symbolic, with the aim to send the Houthis and the international community and to observers a message that the West is going to take action if the Houthis continue to disrupt the shipping routes in the Red Sea. But it also seems to me that nothing has been learned from the last 9 years of war against the Houthis in Yemen, because from what I've seen, there are two main things that have been achieved from this last 9 years. One of them was that this conflict strengthened the Houthis' ties with Iran. It made them more powerful. And with Iranian support, they seem to be more strategic and more equipped than anyone really wants to acknowledge. And secondly, the continuous bombardment of northern Yemen served as a really powerful recruitment tool for the Houthis. You know, they went from the 10,000 fighters that I spoke to you about over a decade ago to now becoming one of the most powerful forces on the ground. And the fear is that these strikes, these retaliatory strikes by the US and the UK, could do the exact same at a time where the Houthis were actually vulnerable and we were on the path to peace. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that, but I will give the floor now to Luca Nevola, who's going to be talking to us about the work that the Yemen Conflict Observatory is going to be doing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nawal, for the brilliant overview, and thank you, Clionadh, for the introduction. Yeah, without further ado, I'll present the Yemen Conflict Observatory, or YCO. Firstly, I'd like to recall that we designed the YCO when the perspective of peace deal seemed imminent in Yemen, but nonetheless, we operated under the assumption that even with a ceasefire in place or the signing of a peace agreement, the likelihood of violence persisting in Yemen would remain significantly high. As already recalled by Clionadh, this is due to multiple factors, and among these, the fact that tensions in the country predate the current conflict and were further exacerbated by over 8 years of war. Secondly, the war has completely reshaped the political environment in Yemen and led to an evolution of military strategies and the reconfiguration of domestic and regional alliances. Additionally, technological innovations have opened new scenarios for the conflict, such as the Red Sea front, for instance. So it is against this backdrop that we identify the need for a dynamic and flexible analytical tool capable of keeping pace with the new and emerging forms of political violence in the country and in the region. A tool capable of offering a timely and consistent monitoring of the conflict and a strategic view on it. Of course, this tool is the Yemen Conflict Observatory. So what is the Yemen Conflict Observatory? It is a living hub, an online platform combining data-driven analysis with robust qualitative assessments. Now, of course, the core business of the YCO, of the Yemen Conflict Observatory, is still producing high-quality real-time data, drawing on the consolidated experience of ACLED and the YDP. But we are aware that raw data is not self-explanatory. It requires experts to be interpreted and made meaningful. So through the YCO, we managed to increase the capacity of our team to produce timely, in-depth analysis. Also, we are strongly aware that data sets are complex products. It is at times challenging for users to interrogate a data set, and users often require guidance to fully explore the potential of the data. So the YCO offers enhanced accessibility through ready-made analytical tools and a user-friendly interface. The four main outputs of the YCO are an expanded real-time data set, increased accessibility to the data and to the methodology through which the data is produced, interactive dashboards and monitors, and a host of new analytical products. I will go now. A lot of behind-the-scenes work was required to produce some of these outputs, and it might not be visible from the platform. So I will endeavor to highlight this behind-the-scenes work during this presentation. What does it mean expanding the data set? We are introducing in the dataset new coded variables. This is a very good example of behind-the-scenes work. In fact, introducing new variables in the dataset requires thorough methodological guidelines and an overall review of all the events included in the dataset since 2015 to guarantee consistency and accuracy. So through the YCO, we have introduced major methodological innovations to track specific type of events. For instance, as a proxy of the economic conflict in Yemen, we can now map market and checkpoint events. As a proxy of the impact of the conflict on civil society, we can now track healthcare and education events. We have also introduced a geographical focus on sensitive areas through the border violence events and by adding new Red Sea locations. And also we have the possibility of tracking emerging forms of warfare by tracking the weapon systems like rockets, drone, WBIDs. Next to these, we have increased accessibility to the dataset, to the website, and to the analytical products. We provide through the YCO easy access to methodological documentation. We have enhanced actor coding, making it sure that the main stakeholders of the conflict are easily identifiable. We offer data literacy support. We are endeavoring to disseminate the analytical products through workshops, briefings, and other initiatives like this one, for instance, and we have created new analytical tools, like, for instance, the dashboards and the monitors that you can find on the Yemen Conflict Observatory. We have almost 30 new dashboards on the Yemen Conflict Observatory, and I will walk you through all these dashboards, not all of them, the main dashboards during the rest of the presentation. And of course, we have a host of new analytical outputs, including actor and regional profiles, monthly situation updates, and in-depth reports and studies. Now, let's move to the platform itself. This is the YCO platform. This is the landing page where you can access all the different sections of the YCO with the actor profiles, regional profiles, monthly reports, and other tools like the dashboards. You can also jump to the different sections from here. What is really interesting about the landing page is that you can access from here the interactive map of the YCO. Each dashboard and each interactive map in the YCO is accompanied by a methodology note explaining the main methodological choices and how you can use the different dashboards. Now, this dashboard encompasses political violence events associated with the Yemen war since the onset of the regional conflict in March 2015. By default, you can visualize on this dashboard events since April 2022, when the UN-mediated truce came into effect in Yemen. But you can also select a custom range from here to analyze the data. Here in the bottom right corner, you can see relevant statistics about the data displayed on the dashboard, focused on the number of events, civilian targeting, and the number of fatalities. Now, of course, it's possible to filter on these events and extract different statistics. A very interesting option on this dashboard is the fact that you can focus on the admin 1 level, and so extract governorate level statistics from here. You can also use these filters to select different types of political violence. And then you can also have a look at the top ranking actors involved in the events displayed on the dashboard. From here, you can also access 3 of the monitors that we have prepared for the YCO. As I was mentioning before, we have a geographical focus, and we selected border violence as one of the most sensitive issues for the ongoing peace negotiations, but also for its humanitarian dimension. As you probably know, there are spoilers acting on the border that might reignite the conflict, and migrants are being targeted on the border. We have also selected a number of other variables. And for instance, we have market events as a proxy to analyze correlations between violence and the economy. Markets and checkpoints are extremely relevant in Yemen and are areas of key importance both for the tribal system and for state administration. Through this monitor, you can again extract governorate level statistics about market and checkpoint events. And then, of course, we can move to the healthcare and education events that are a proxy to analyze the impact of the conflict on civil society and service provision. We are already working to implement new coded variables and new monitors in the future for the YCO. Now, next to the main dashboard on the landing page, you can also have access to CAST, the ACLED Conflict Alert System. This is a global prediction tool that forecasts the number of political violence events in every country around the world. Here we have 3 tools focused on Yemen. We have a map, as you can see here, highlighting Yemen's governorates, where a significant increase or decrease in the number of events is forecasted for the following month. So using the color pattern down here or hovering over the map, you can grasp an immediate understanding of how violence is forecasted or predicted to increase or decrease in the following month, and you can extract the relevant statistics. This table here provides an overall summary focused on each admin 1, on each governorate. And then we have this pie chart, which basically displays the distribution of event types based on the number of forecasted events. Next to these analytical tools, we also have other thematic dashboards: the Red Sea attacks dashboard and the weapon systems dashboard. So let's have a look at the Red Sea attacks dashboard. This is a very good example of how the YCO aims to quickly respond to unfolding violence in the country and provide new analytical tools to understand and analyze this violence and these emerging trends. Through this dashboard and through a thorough methodological work on the dataset, we have introduced new variables that allows us to track violence in the Red Sea with very precise locations and with new information that was previously unreleased with the dataset. These events are organized by target, as you can see here, and through the bar graph, you can immediately grasp an idea of how the attacks are unfolding in the Red Sea. From this sidebar, you can see all the attacks perpetrated by the Houthis in the Red Sea, organized by date and name of the target with the type of political violence. You can also decide to show or hide other variables, and you can select the relevant month. Clicking on the different events, you can see on the map where they are located. And then by clicking on the dots, you can have an idea of the nodes of the event itself. We are also providing the flag of the ship targeted, the owner's nationality, the manager's nationality, and the operator's nationality, all variables that are very useful to verify the claims made by the Houthis for these Red Sea attacks. Another dashboard we have prepared for the YCO is the Weapons Systems dashboard. Now, again, through a thorough methodological work, we are now able to track events involving the use of rockets, drones, and WBIEDs in Yemen. The general functioning of this dashboard is similar to the main dashboard I already showed you, but what you can do here is also filtering on the weapon type, on the subtype of the weapon, for instance, multi-use drones, and then also select the range. Let's say, for instance, extended range. Based on this, you can filter the events on the dashboard. You can focus on the admin 1 level, and you can select the custom date range and extract the relevant statistics. You can also select the perpetrator, and you can also see who the affected actors are. Now, moving to the analytical products offered by the platform, I already mentioned that the YCO, the Yemen Conflict Observatory, offers actor profiles and regional profiles. The actor profiles are organized so as to have umbrella actors and sub-actors affiliated with the main umbrella actors. So, for instance, here we have the Southern Transitional Council as an umbrella actor and 2 sub-actors affiliated with the Southern Transitional Council. Clearly, the plan is to add relevant sub-actors for all the main umbrella actors, and we are already drafting new actor profiles. Now, let's have a look at how the umbrella actor profile is organized. For instance, let's have a look at the Southern Transitional Council. Each actor profile has a brief overview and the number of sections, the associated actors, areas of activity, leadership, and historical background. The areas of activity are displayed on an interactive dashboard, and here again you can focus on the admin 1 level, select custom date range, and also have a focus on the different sub-actors connected with the main umbrella actor. We have a section about the leadership of the actor, the historical background, and then the timeline. This information is updated on a quarterly basis. Now, if we have a look at the sub-actor profile, for instance, the elite forces, these are organized more or less in the same way, but the interactive dashboard allows you to also filter on political violence events. Next to the actor profiles, we have regional profiles. YCO experts decided to carve out a number of regions that are not overlapping with the governorates of Yemen. These regions are defined by similar conflict dynamics and similar conflict patterns. So, hovering over this map on the landing page, you can access all the different regional profiles. So, for instance, let's have a look at the Thais regional profile. In each regional profile, we provide a territorial control map where you can see, based on the color pattern, how the different areas are controlled by different actors. Contested areas are usually either split between the warring parties or they record ongoing conflict. Each regional profile provides an overview of the area, of the region, an interactive map, the conflict background, a timeline, and again, this information is updated quarterly and the regional context that is relevant to understand the evolution of conflict dynamics. What's really interesting about the interactive dashboard hosted by the regional profiles is that we are also mapping relevant infrastructure. So these dashboards have all the other functions I have already showed before, but you can also select or hide relevant infrastructure on the dashboard. And last but not least, the YCO is producing monthly reports since September 2023. All these reports are already published on the YCO website. Most of the reports have been translated into Arabic, and in the future we will be publishing the reports also with the Arabic translation. And let's have a look at how the monthly reports are organized and published. Monthly reports are published in two parts. The first part of the monthly report is published at the very beginning of the month. It is composed of a timeline of the major developments in Yemen, split between violent and military events and strategic developments. But of course, given the flexibility that the YCO is allowing, we can also add additional information. So, for instance, in coincidence with the Red Sea crisis, we are also producing a timeline of all the Red Sea attacks and events. Also, the first part of the monthly presents a dashboard with all the events and the relevant statistics, and it's possible to hover over the icons to get some context about all these events. This is the first part of the monthly, published at the beginning of the month. The second part of the monthly, instead, is composed of this visual presenting the key figures for the previous month and the regional focus on two governorates where we recorded either an increase or decrease of violence or lethality of the events. Then we have a monthly focus on a specific topic. For instance, in January, we focused on the US-led airstrikes and strikes, and Iona, who will talk after me, will dive into this report and present the analysis in a more in-depth way. And then, after the monthly report and monthly focus, we have a looking forward section presenting potential scenarios for the future and a section of roundups, summing up the main events that characterized the previous month. With this, I can leave the floor to my colleague Iona Craig from the Yemen Data Project, who will focus on the monthly analytical outputs. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca, for that very thorough review of what the YCO does. I'm going to sort of pick up where Luca left off and really talk a bit more in depth about the monthly reports that he was talking about at the end there, really. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a more detailed run through of what one of the regular analytical reports product, that we will be producing to help break down and contextualize the data looks like. For those of you familiar with the Yemen Data Project monthly updates, the Yemen Conflict Observatory monthlies will be much more extensive than those, and they will be, as you can already see, visually much more sophisticated. The body of the monthly situation updates will be, as Luca already mentioned, the focus report. But rather than being another descriptive summary of recent conflict dynamics, which are already being produced by numerous other organizations, the aim of the monthly focus report is instead to combine data-driven analysis with qualitative assessments in an accessible format. So this is really to sort of save you from having to trawl through the details of the data set on countrywide political violence. Looking at those dashboards that Luca just showed us, I'm sure anybody interested in Yemen could easily spend several hours, if not days, going through the details of all of those events. But these monthly focus reports, along with other analytical reports, can add to individuals and organizations working on Yemen, helping to unpack and understand the data, going beyond the narrative to try to explain what happened, why events unfolded this way, the wider impact, and how this might affect the situation going forward. The analysis will be supported by data visualizations that will hopefully make the findings easily digestible, whether mapping Houthi attacks on shipping, US-led strikes, frontline clashes, or even street protests and security incidents. So taking a look at the January monthly report as an example of what we can learn from the data, there have been, as I'm sure many of you may have come across, competing claims about the effectiveness of the US-led strikes under the banner of Operation Poseidon Archer, which began on January 12th, and whether military action resulted in reducing Houthi capability and therefore a reduction in Houthi attacks on shipping. The data shows that Houthi attacks on shipping increased between the 9th of January and the 31st of January, despite these airstrikes. The Houthis conducted 21 attacks on ships from the 9th of January to the end of the month, compared to 15 in the previous 3 weeks, prior to the start of Operation Poseidon Archer. We also looked at the type of vessels targeted. Most Houthi attacks prior to Operation Poseidon Archer targeted container and dry bulk carriers, but in January that changed with 2 oil tankers being struck. Attacks also expanded geographically, as we can see here. 11 of the 21 attacks since the 9th of January were in the Gulf of Aden. And we can see here in the red line, which tracks attacks in the Gulf of Aden, which rose sharply in the second half of January, and attacks in the southern Red Sea in orange reduced somewhat before leveling off. And in the northern Red Sea, the dark green, where there have been no attacks launched since December last year. The modes of attacks also changed with the use of explosive-laden drone boats, waterborne IEDs. The January monthly focus report also reflects on the comparison with the first 3 weeks of the US-led strikes and the previous Saudi-led bombing campaign that started in 2015, and shows what the data can tell us, touching on a little bit what Nawal was saying earlier. ACLED recorded 29 US-UK airstrike events in Yemen in January, resulting in at least 8 reported fatalities. But by comparison, the first 3 weeks of the Saudi-led Operation Decisive Storm in March 2015 and early April 2015 saw 395 airstrike events, resulting in over 500 fatalities. And those Saudi-led airstrikes at the beginning of Operation Decisive Storm in 2015 hit at least 200 known military sites in that initial 3-week period, several of which have also been amongst the first targets of the US strikes. Al-Dailami Air Base in Sana'a City was the first location bombed in both the US-UK-led strikes and in the Saudi-led coalition bombing campaign in 2015. 9 of the locations targeted by the US-UK strikes were previously hit by 419 airstrikes in the Saudi-led air war between 2015 and 2022, with up to 1,336 individual projectiles, as we recorded the Yemen Data Project. However, this bombardment between 2015 and 2022 did not stop these locations from still being used as military sites by the Houthis. We can conclude from these first weeks of the US-led military intervention that following the strikes, the Houthis have escalated and expanded their attacks on international shipping lanes, while also increasing their attacks on the front lines in Yemen. As a result, the longer the bombing campaign continues, the more resolute the Houthis may become, similar to events that we saw in 2015. With the monthly reports, we also aim to provide forward-looking assessments of developments, as Luca mentioned, trying to extrapolate key indicators and triggers and shifts in the nature of the conflict. For the January monthly update, some of the report forward-looking assessments have actually come to pass in the last 48 hours in activities in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. In the January update, we highlighted that further escalation is more likely than a reduction in military activity. As has been the trend since October, these operations will likely steadily expand in the targeting and type of attacks if regional tensions keep rising, potentially extending to Houthi strikes on US and UK military sites in the region. In response to the US designation of the Houthis as a specially designated global terrorist group, the Houthis ordered all US and UK nationals working for the UN and INGOs to leave the country. Our assessment is that the group will likely introduce additional measures in lockstep with any international sanctions, further restricting the operating environment in Yemen. In January, Yemen saw an increase in hostilities on the ground, and the Houthis are testing the resolution of the forces aligned with the internationally recognized government. Looking forward, there is some expectation that Houthi forces will use the regional escalation as a justification to try to seize key sites in Shabwa and Marib, thus potentially derailing the ongoing truce talks in Riyadh. These forward-looking assessments that we make in the monthly report will also be in addition to the conflict alert systems that we just saw Luca highlighting, which will identify potential points of escalation. So there's much more forward-looking summaries here than certainly we were providing previously with the Yemen Data Project and the airstrikes data alone. In addition to the focus report, the monthly situation updates include a roundup of Yemen-related events. Although there is a lot of interest at the moment on the Red Sea and attacks on international shipping, the monthly reports will, of course, cover events in Yemen countrywide. For January, that included the designation of the Houthis as a global terrorist group, the continuing fall of the Yemeni rial in internationally recognized government-controlled areas, despite the transfer of a Saudi financial aid package, and as well the heavy fighting in Shabwa between Houthi and Southern forces. Fierce hostilities were reported on the northwestern Shabwa border in January, including reports of heavy losses between Houthi and anti-Houthi forces. The fighting was some of the most intensive since the start of the UN-mediated truce back in April 2022. This timeline of the major developments for the month includes demonstrations and strategic developments, as well as violence and military events, as you can see here. But in January, there were also Houthi attacks on the West Coast front line in Hodeidah, as you can see, and several AQAP-linked IED blasts in Aden, as well as all of these strategic events that are going on the right of your screen. We hope these monthly updates will be a useful analytical summary. And as Luke already said, they are available from going back to September last year that you can look at via the website. And also going forward, the monthly situation updates will be available in Arabic. And so I think with that, I will pass back to Clionadh just to wrap us up.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you very much. That was incredibly instructive. I just want to go over some small details before we have maybe time for a few questions, which is that I would like to warmly thank everybody who's contributed. This has been a really insightful webinar. And of course, you're able to access the Yemen Conflict Observatory through the link on your screen now. I'd like to thank Nawal for really reviewing what are effectively an incredibly flexible group, if you will, a group that we will certainly hear more from in the coming months, especially as they shapeshift in order to deliver some short-term goals that they seem to be developing on the fly. Of course, Iona, I'd like to thank her for indicating that some of the materials that were written in the January report really came to pass in February. And so it really underscores the level of detail and attention that the writers have put into the monthly reports that I hope you all will continue to enjoy. And of course to Luca for going through a somewhat exhaustive set of dashboards, which are nonetheless incredibly interesting and very useful, I think, because if there's anything about the Yemeni situation that I've come to notice in the last few years, it's that the way in which people are introduced to it tends to be very specific, whether it's about Red Sea issues, or it's weapons issues, or it's civilian harm. And we've tried to account for all of those different interests in how we put the YCO together. So thank you, everybody. And of course, thank you very much to YDP, who have been a great partner for several years. And we're delighted to be able to work more closely together with this. So I'm just going to see if there are any questions, or if people in the audience would prefer to offer some commentary or questions now. We have a few minutes, if that's of interest to anybody. In the meantime, any final thoughts from our panelists would be welcome. But otherwise, I think I want to reiterate how delighted we are to have a YCO. It's been something that we've talked about for several years.
Yeah, I'd only add that if people don't want to ask questions or anything, please feel free to provide as much feedback as you like, either via email or on social media, because we'd love to know how everybody is getting on with the YCO and what we can improve or what we might have missed, and what you will think about it. And thank you all very much for coming.
Thanks, Iona. That's a perfect way to remind people that these projects, especially when they're new, are highly adaptable to the needs of the people who will be using the resource. So if there's something you believe should be in there, we are all ears. But I think everybody is similarly full of information after this. So I'm going to give both Nawal and Luca and Iona, of course, a chance to sign off before I sign the webinar off myself. Iona, did you have any last comments?
Perhaps before we sign off, I just wanted to thank all the people who contributed to making the YCO possible. The Yemen team at ACLED, and of course YDP, and Danny Lord for putting together the platform, and everybody else working at comms.
Yes,
I would reiterate that. Danny Lord, who's done an amazing job with his team at ACLED, and all of the team at ACLED have done so much work on the reports and on the analysis, and in what has been really an unbelievably short space of time, really, since we started this project, that has made this amazing platform live in just a matter of a few months, with a huge amount of work. So yeah, a huge thank you to all of them, and to Danny Lord and his team as well. Yeah, it's been, and yourself, Luca, as well. It's been a really huge effort to produce this in a few months.
I just wanted to add, I mean, I said this at the beginning, how valuable the work that all of you do for people like me who are reporting on Yemen. And I think particularly on Yemen, we find it so difficult to find any data. And so the work that all of you do is just, it's so invaluable. It's really important, and it keeps the human suffering on the agenda. You know, it keeps it highlighted, it keeps the Yemen on the bulletins, and it's incredibly important. So thank you so much for all the work that you do.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to everybody. I believe the first person is Nader, who is going to be unmuted and make a comment or question. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Welcome.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you very much actually for ACLED and YDP on the great project. Also, I could second Nawal by saying that Yemen is a black zone out of information. It's very difficult to get some information. And personally, thank you, Luca and Iona, for the great work. So of course, I'll be using this a lot in digging out some information. But for that, I wanted to ask actually, because still I didn't go through it, but is there any section related or information, let's say in general, related to minorities in this platform that I could use it, or others that are interested in this subject that could use the data through it? And since dear Luca was mentioning also in one of sectors of the report that the affected actors is also in that field? Is it categorized in that field of how finding related information to minorities? And just the second part, if this data, since when it is like, till when I could go back to it? Is it like a certain year of information? And if there is a possibility to know also the source of the data, like for example, is it the first hand you get it through your project, or is through and collaboration with different NGOs, civil society organizations, or there is also a possibility that NGOs and civil society organization to provide informations to ACLED and YDP to include it in this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nader. Luca, can you take those questions, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Nader, for your comments. So concerning the last question, data set covers a time range spanning between 2015 and last week. So you can go back to the beginning of 2015 with the data. Minority groups, religious groups, and other groups are included in the data set, and they are coded as specific actors. Just keep in mind that we do have a threshold for the inclusion of the events in the data set. So you would find violence against civilians events where injuries or serious injuries occurred to the civilians, but you wouldn't find lower threshold events like those we included in the past in different projects like the religion project. In the future, it might be possible to create an ad hoc dashboard visualizing events impacting civilians. For instance, this is something we haven't currently included in the YCO platform, but this is definitely a very good plan for the future. And lastly, in terms of the sources we use, we usually rely on secondary sources, on data provided by our partners, whether public or confidential. And we also rely on selected social media accounts. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Luca. We are unlikely to have time for the second question, but I've asked the person with that question to leave their email so we can get back to them. And I would like to again reiterate my deep thanks both for your attendance at this webinar, but also for the people who contributed and what sounds like the long-suffering Danny Lord in his development of this website. But it's been a wonderful opportunity to work closely with a great partner. It's been lovely to get to know Nawal as she contributed to this webinar, and I look very forward to the commentary from the using community for this conflict hub, and I will thank you all again. Thank you very much, everybody.